Municipal Affairs and Provincial Planning has launched the consultation for the new Municipal Government Act, building on more than a decade of conversations about modernizing the municipal framework. This presentation will provide a review of work to date, an overview of the proposed framework, principles and concepts, some of the details of the proposed framework, and next steps as the province prepares for new legislation by the fall of 2016. This map shows the current municipal boundaries. There are 73 municipalities today, representing 70% of the population, but covering only 30% of the area. Our municipalities reflect a rich heritage of dedication, local interest, and community building. This tradition is also our current challenge. Many of our municipalities are landlocked, with limited populations to draw on for council positions or committee and volunteer roles. Our municipalities often struggle to achieve economies of scale for the delivery of affordable services. Citizens expect financial accountability, transparent processes for elections and decision-making, and regular council meetings. Conversations about these challenges are not unique to PEI. Regionally, discussions about municipal structures are taking place in the face of challenges relating to municipal capacity, finances, and the sustainable delivery of affordable services. While the story in each province takes on a different flavor with differences in scale, responsibilities, and funding models, conversations about municipal structures in the 21st century are taking place across the country. Our boundaries reflect an earlier era of municipal governance, and so does our legislation. Today, we have 3 acts governing municipalities: the Municipalities Act, the Charlottetown Area Municipalities Act, and the City of Summerside Act. Our legislation is outdated and in many cases is simply not robust enough to guide municipalities through current expectations and complex situations. In 2005, the report from a joint Municipal-Provincial Municipalities Act Review Committee was released, containing over 120 recommendations, including that there be a single piece of legislation for municipalities. In 2009, the Commissioner of Land and Local Governance, Ralph Thompson, recommended updating and modernizing the land use planning framework, new funding arrangements for municipalities, discussions on new municipal boundaries, and modern legislation. While this consultation deals with the Municipal Government Act, we have a range of different initiatives underway at the moment, touching on many of these recommendations. In May 2010, a steering committee was created to oversee the work on funding arrangements and on the legislation. Between 2010 and 2012, the Legislative Subcommittee prepared a policy draft of the new Act that outlined a vision and framework for municipalities able to meet modern standards for strong local governments. Efforts picked up again in 2015 as new targets were identified for tabling the new legislation. A consultation draft of the legislation and background information is available online, and we welcome your advice and input on the key concepts. The target for introduction of the Act in the legislature is the fall of 2016, with the new legislation to take effect in 2017 once the most critical regulations are ready for adoption. We currently have 3 pieces of municipal legislation: the Municipalities Act, the Charlottetown Area Municipalities Act, and the City of Summerside Act. Through the new Municipal Government Act, or the new MGA for short, we will be moving to a single piece of legislation for all municipalities. Legislation that will provide a framework for modern and accountable local government in Prince Edward Island. The new Municipal Government Act envisions municipal governments that meet modern expectations and standards for good governance, accessibility, accountability, and transparency. This vision is for local governments able to provide services to residents with the flexibility to govern effectively and meet the needs of residents. Those needs and expectations, as we know, are changing and expanding for all levels of government. The Draft Act integrates governance models and best practices from across Canada. Through the 2005 review of the Municipalities Act, the Thompson Report, and the extensive work of the Legislative Subcommittee, there have been many opportunities for conversations and discussions on a new municipal framework. Through this next stage of consultation, we are seeking your feedback and suggestions on the draft legislation itself, which remains subject to change. The new legislation represents an evolving municipal framework. The introduction and implementation of many aspects of the new model will need to be phased in, and we welcome your advice on how best to do that. The new Act is based on several key principles of expanded municipal authority and discretion within areas of jurisdiction, municipal viability and capacity, and municipalities governed by the principles of accessibility, accountability, and transparency. The desired outcomes are that municipalities have a wider scope of authority and more flexibility. Municipalities are able to meet increased expectations from the residents and from government, and municipalities are accessible to residents and other stakeholders. The MGA will provide a municipal framework built on modern standards of governance and financial accountability, with professional administration in the implementation of council policies and programs and effective service delivery. The key concept for the proposed framework is an updated municipal structure built on a council CAO model, with one set of rules for all municipalities in almost all matters. The draft MGA builds in clear accountability and transparency, increased clarity on expectations for administration, governance, and financial management, increased guidance on provincial standards, and additional tools and powers for the minister, and a system of checks and balances, so that as we expand authority in areas of jurisdiction, there will be an accompanying framework of accountability and transparency. The MGA sets out a model where all municipalities operate under the same set of rules, with broader areas of jurisdiction. For example, current legislation allows councils to offer black fly and mosquito control. New legislation would enable councils to provide for the control, health, and safety of, as well as the protection from, wild animals, including insects and birds. This type of framework provides for a broader and expanded scope of service delivery at the municipal level. The framework also confirms that municipal councils have the rights, powers, and privileges of a natural person, and the legislation includes a broad interpretation clause. The MGA provides new processes for the formation of new municipalities and for the restructuring of existing municipalities, including the enablement of provincially initiated restructuring processes. Minimum thresholds are established for new municipalities or for restructured municipalities in keeping with the recommendations from Commissioner Thompson and provincial statements over the last year. The new Act does not require existing municipalities to restructure in order to meet the minimum thresholds for new municipalities, but existing small municipalities are not exempted from the governance and operational standards set out in the legislation. Over time, all municipalities will be responsible for providing the basic services of fire protection, emergency management planning, and land use planning, although in many cases, municipalities may opt to provide these services through shared programs or by contracting to other municipalities. Under the MGA, existing communities will be continued as rural municipalities, reducing existing confusion around the community term and reinforcing that even the smallest municipalities are local governments. The Municipal Government Act establishes consistent, standardized processes for all municipalities, with consistent council sizes for towns and rural municipalities, and new requirements for all-day elections and plebiscite procedures for all councils, with an emphasis on fully democratic processes. The Act will provide more clarity on the roles and responsibilities of the Mayor, Council, and Administration, on how public and closed meetings are to be run including electronic participation, and on the restrictions around council members filling the role of or taking on the duties of an employee. The Act will provide more clarity on the calling, rescheduling, running, and cancelling of meetings with more flexibility for councils within a framework of minimum procedures and policies. The Act will also include more consequences for contravening legislation. Building on the principles of accessibility, transparency, and accountability to the public, the Act will require at least 6 council meetings a year, publicly accessible municipal offices with regular hours of operation, and procedural bylaws and codes of conduct for councils. These types of requirements especially are areas where the province is seeking your feedback, comments, and advice, which will help us determine how best to transition in some of these requirements, new for many of our municipalities. The MGA will provide clear conflict of interest guidelines in keeping with national standards, new standards for confidentiality and accountability, and new standards for disclosure of information and protection of privacy. The province will also develop resources, templates, and models to assist in the introduction and implementation of these and other pieces. With regards to municipal finances, the Municipal Government Act establishes clear guidelines on budgeting and reporting procedures, including more details on the content and scope of budgets and year-end reporting for consistency and transparent financial management. And water and sewer utilities, where they exist, would be a department of the municipality rather than a controlled corporation, and would be consistently included in budgeting procedures and in the calculation of municipal debt limits. In the proposed framework, municipal financial plans would include operating budgets, capital budgets, 5-year capital plans, and asset management planning, putting an updated structure around many existing requirements. The MGA will extend the idea of one set of rules for all councils to financial matters, Authority would rest with each council for the approval of budgets and for capital borrowing. The MGA also offers expanded options for reserve funds, as well as greater financial transparency and accountability by extending financial audits to all municipalities after a transition period. Review engagements by auditors for municipalities with budgeted expenditures of less than $50,000 will be permitted during the transition period. Under the MGA, the fiscal year would run from April to March instead of the calendar year currently in place, allowing municipal and provincial budgets to align, particularly as they pertain to grants, funding, and any other components that are timed around the provincial year. The Act establishes requirements for procurement and purchasing bylaws, in accordance with regulations and any applicable trade agreements. Funding arrangements are a fundamental piece of the conversation, and information on a new framework will be forthcoming. With regards to the provincial role, the MGA incorporates more tools for the province and an expanded use of regulations. While the Act will be much longer than the existing legislation and will set out the broad framework, many of the details may be located in the regulations, in areas such as election procedures, procurement standards, content requirement for budgets, and notice requirements. The Act will include more options for addressing non-compliance and enforcement, and again the expectation is that all municipalities would be held to the same standard. As well, municipal bylaws and services will be required to be consistent with any provincial legislation, regulations, and standards. In terms of transitions, some parts of the Act would apply immediately, such as the minimum number of meetings a year, the standards for conflict of interest and meeting behind closed doors, and the establishment of powers and services. Other requirements might be implemented over the short term, such as procedural bylaws and conflict of interest bylaws, with the intent to provide models and templates to assist with the initial adoption. In other areas, transition periods will be included where appropriate. For example, some aspects would come into effect in time for the 2018 municipal elections, such as consistent council size, full election processes, and the distribution of populations between wards. Other aspects, such as full audits, would come into effect after 2 years. For emergency management planning, we are anticipating a 3-year time frame. A 5-year time frame is proposed for elements such as land use planning and wheelchair-accessible offices open a minimum number of hours weekly. We do seek your feedback on those timeframes and any other aspects of transition. During the consultation period, the focus will be on conversations with our municipal and public stakeholders, as well as on the preparation of regulations and templates. The target of having a new Municipal Government Act to the Legislature for the fall for 2016 is an ambitious one, and we need your advice and comments to finalize the legislation. Online consultations were launched on September 8, 2016, providing information to the general public as well as to municipal leaders. Conversations with our municipal leaders will focus on the principles and basic framework of the new legislation and on seeking advice on implementation, building on presentations earlier this year at the annual meeting of the Federation of Prince Edward Island Municipalities and to members of the Association of Municipal Administrators. The MGA website provides both plain language explanations and the legislative draft itself. Comments can be submitted through the online form or by contacting Municipal Affairs directly. We look forward to hearing from you.